going to do is we're going to talk about angles and angle pairs. A little bit of vocabulary to start with. My guess is that you know almost all of it, so I'm going to go kind of quickly. Okay, again, so I'm not torturing you, but we are all on the same page. Does everybody have notes and a protractor? Anybody need anything? Okay, so we're going to start with the basic angle or definition of an angle. So an angle is made of two rays with a common endpoint. Okay, so two rays with a common endpoint. So two rays, remember rays have one definite endpoint and the other end goes on forever and ever. They have to share this endpoint. The vertex is that common endpoint that they share. So in this figure here, C is my vertex. It's like the hinge of the angle. The sides of the angle, sometimes they're called legs of the angle, sometimes they're called the rays of the angle. All of those are correct terminology. The rays in our case are going to be CA and CD. Remember with naming rays, you have to list that endpoint first. Questions on the parts of an angle? Okay, so let's talk about how to name an angle. We have four ways of naming an angle. One way is by using 3 points on the angle, one of which has to be a vertex. The other two, one has to be from one leg, the other has to be from the other leg. So I can name this angle CAB, or I can name it angle BC. So I can put the top one straight. So it could be ACB, I apologize, or angle BCA. The symbol for an angle kind of looks like a less than sign, but a less than sign is kind of tipped evenly, whereas an angle sign has a horizontal piece right here. I'm not going to get all upset if you accidentally draw your angle sign like this, like this first one, but try to make it look more like this, where that bottom piece is horizontal. Okay, so I can name it ACB or BCA. What's important is that my vertex here ends up in the center. And then one from each leg on each side of it. I can also name this specific angle, angle C, just naming it by its vertex. The last way I can name this angle is by putting a number on the inside. Okay, sometimes they're given to you, you can also number them, but I can refer to that as angle 5. It's honestly my favorite way because I think it's less thinking and it's fast. Questions about what an angle is or how to name it? Yes. Usually they start at 1, 2, 3. It doesn't really matter though. They could start at 5. Are you all right back there? Oh my gosh. All right. So now, okay, let me back up. This whole angle C, naming it by its vertex, that only works some of the times. Here's an example where this would not work. If I asked you to find the measure of angle A, your question to me should be which one? Because I see an angle right here at A, I see an angle right here at A, and I see this big angle at A. So there can only be one angle if you're going to name it by its vertex. Does that make sense? Otherwise that just gets too confusing. So this one we would just need numbers, or we'd need more points labeled, so we can name it the long way. Questions on that? All right, the next thing I want to talk to you quickly about is how to measure an angle. You all have protractors in front of you. Can you see, do you need to turn on the lights to see the numbers of the protractors? Okay, if you change your mind, let me know. Okay, so on your protractors, you do have a little tiny hole at the bottom, right? That is where the vertex should be placed. Okay, so the vertex should be placed on, or the hole you should be able to see the vertex. And then you need to line up that zero line, that horizontal line, with so visually inspect that angle. Is it going to be less than 90 or more than 90? Ours is going to be less, so we need to read the smaller numbers, right? So approximately, what does it measure this angle? About 50 degrees? Are we good with that? Yeah. Here. You can do that. Oh, okay. All right, here's what I want you to do. Use your protractor, the straight edge of your protractor. I want you to draw an angle somewhere on your paper, or if you want scratch papers. I want you to then trade it with your neighbor, have them measure it and write it down. Swap papers back and make sure they're right. Okay, so if you want scrap paper, grab scrap paper. Whatever you'd like to do. Does anybody need help with measuring? So I look yellow, but could have been chocolates. Okay, make sure you swap back, get your own notes back, and verify that they are correct. Okay, so let's look past the measuring angles. Got a couple more terms for you here. The next term are congruent angles. So if two angles are congruent, that means they have the same measure. Just like we have congruent segments, we have segments the same measure, right? So if we have two congruent angles, hold on, my word. If we're going to show that we have congruent angles, what we typically do is draw an arc in there, and then put our tick mark on the arc. Okay, so we put the tick mark on the arc itself. So here I can say that angle A is congruent to angle B. When we were talking about segments on Friday, we talked about a segment bisector, right? Well, now we have an angle bisector. So instead of cutting a segment in half, now we're going to cut an angle in half. Okay, so we can start with an angle. My angle bisector is going to divide that original angle into two smaller congruent angles. So this here is my angle bisector. An angle bisector could be a line, it could be a ray, it could be a segment, it doesn't really matter. do, I'm going to give you about 3-4 minutes here. You have 3 figures on this next slide. I want you to work with your table group. I want you to determine a given angle bisector and what angle it bisects, and then I want you to make any congruent angles. So do this for all 3 figures, just like we did with second bisectors the other day. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Would you start, would it be L or no, N and L, because like the middle thing, yeah. Let me know. Does any group need more time? Yes? Okay. Okay. Everybody, right? Please help them figure out this. What's that? Yeah, so I got enough PTSD on you can show me the snowman. It looks like a horse. You have a hat on it. But your snowman feels like a horse. That's all right. I'm sorry. It's fine. It doesn't matter. The color really is just nice. When you go to price stock, it doesn't matter the color. It just matters the color. I think it's just like that salad machine. Helper, so she all right, let's talk about what you have. In the top left figure, do we have any congruent angles? No, we do not. So we do not have an angle bisector. We don't have any congruent angles to list. How about this one over here? Do we have any congruent angles? Yes, so we can say that angle SRP is congruent to angle QRP. Remember, you can reverse those. It could be PRS and it could be PRQ. Okay, so those two angles are congruent. So we name it angle R is congruent to angle R. No, we have too many angles happening at R, right? So do we have an angle bisector? Yes, RP is the angle bisector. So RP is an angle bisector. How about the bottom middle here? Do we have any congruent angles? Yes, we have angle NML is congruent to angle JNK. Is that okay? Okay. Otherwise, it has to be, or it can be K and J, right? Okay. Any angle bisectors? We do not have an angle bisector in this one. There's no angle bisector because an angle bisector takes one angle and cuts it exactly in half. It's a ray or a segment that cuts one angle into two equal parts. Any questions about that? All right. Next two terms, we have parallel and perpendicular. So parallel lines are two lines in the same plane that do not intersect. Okay, so they will never ever intersect. A couple things I want you to know about this. First of all, don't forget this means line I, this means line J. This is a symbol for parallel, like a tall, skinny 11. Have you seen that symbol before? Yes? Okay, so this says I is parallel to J. To show a figure is parallel, our lines are parallel on a figure, we put arrows. If I had another set of lines, it would have two sets of arrows. A third set of lines would have three sets of arrows. Some books will actually fill those arrows in so they'll be like solid triangles, like this. But they mean the same thing. Okay, so either way it would work. Perpendicular lines are lines in the same plane again that intersect at a 90-degree angle. They intersect actually make four 90-degree angles. We typically usually only mark one as a right angle. But this is the symbol for perpendicular. It's an upside down capital T. Are you familiar with this symbol? Some people are not. Okay, so this just says K is perpendicular to L. That's probably more about the symbols. You probably knew the names. It's more about symbols and how to mark things. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Your water choking is contagious back there. All right, next term. Next term, we're going to talk about some single angles first, and then we're going to talk about some angle pairs. So a right angle. A right angle measures exactly 90 degrees. So it's an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. So we could write 90 degrees in there. More typically, we use the square symbol. Put the little square in the angle. The square symbol is another thing that kind of saves you from a poor drawing. So let's say I was drawing something, and at the end it said that this angle that I drew is supposed to be a right angle. And you put the square in there, and you're safe. Okay, you don't have to redraw your figure. You don't have to make it look more accurate. Put the little right angle marking in there, and you're golden. Good? Okay, an acute angle. An acute angle is an angle that measures between 0 and 90 degrees. Can't measure 0, cannot measure 90. That's a 90. Okay, so the angle is between less than 90 but greater than 0. So the algebra folks. No, I don't like this. All right, an obtuse angle. An obtuse angle measures between 90 and 180. Okay, so it has to be less than 180 or greater than 90. Yes. Yes. Do your paper out still. If you can't figure it out, I'll talk to you about it. All right, next we're going to talk about some angle pairs. Okay, we're going to talk about some special angle pairs. The first angle pair we're going to talk about are called vertical angles. Okay, maybe something I need to mention first. Do you know the term adjacent? Have you ever heard of that? Like adjacent hotel rooms. What does that mean? They're right next to each other, right? What do they usually share? So usually, definitely a wall, and a lot of times a door. There is a door on that wall, sometimes to go in between without having to go out the hallway, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to talk about adjacent and non-adjacent with angles as well. So adjacent angles mean that they're right next to each other. They share a ray instead of a wall or a door. Okay. So vertical angles. Vertical angles are created when two lines intersect. So when two lines intersect, we actually get four angles, right? They are the non-adjacent angles. Okay, so they are the non-adjacent angles. They're non-adjacent. They're the non-adjacent angles. Does anybody know anything else about vertical angles? No? Anything about their measurements? So look up at angles 1 and 2. Do they guess this? Everybody's afraid to say it. Vertical angles are congruent. Vertical angles have the same measure. E for effort. Vertical angles are congruent. You're gonna use that a little bit in your homework tonight. Okay, so vertical angles, they are congruent. Yes. Okay, the next term are complementary angles. Complementary angles are any two angles. They could be adjacent, they could be in different rooms. It doesn't matter. As long as their angles are, as long as their sum is 90 degrees. So two angles whose sum is equal to 90 degrees. Supplementary angles are two angles. Again, they could be adjacent, they could be in different rooms. As long as their sum is 180 degrees, they're considered supplementary. All right, so you confuse the two. Think about alphabetical order. Complementary, supplementary. They match numerically as well. I know people confuse these all the time. So complementary adds up to be 90, supplementary adds up to be 180. So if you need a trick in order to memorize which one's which. Okay, the last term is called a linear pair. So what's linear sound like? Line, what's pair? Two. So two angles that form a line. So there are two angles that form a line. So linear pairs have to be adjacent and they must be supplementary. They have to be both adjacent and supplementary. So supplementary, remember, they could be separate. They can be separate from each other, but if it's a linear pair, they have to be adjacent. All right, so I feel like a lot of those terms were reviewed for you, a couple maybe new. Okay, so your homework tonight is going to be a lot about vocabulary and practicing with that. Your homework is on delta math. Okay, here is your code for delta math. It's a little bit different this year. When you go, if you already have an account, just log in, and then you can go up to schools and insert our class code. Has anyone here never used delta math before? Okay, I'll come help you guys. If you've never used it before, go to deltamath.com. And then most of the way down, I think you can click on register. Yeah, you'll actually love it. Yes. Yeah. Research stuff, don't put out. Me too. I got it. And now my God was I skipped. Okay, no, but like when I was like even 2 minutes, I would like gap off and then down and then go back home. I don't know. Anybody need help? Anybody need help logging in? I had been an out of the sound for just 6 years. I had it every year with my just except for last year. Say that again. Yeah. If I need help getting in, understanding what to do, it's Jenna. I'll be sure again. I thought you were like did you ever have it? Right, go ahead. Oh. Well, not before you go on. Before you do credit for that section. And then you can back out of it and go to the next one. Okay? Yes. Yes. Yeah, so I'm going to take my step 3 to go. What do you come with? That's higher. Okay, no, it's okay. Make sure you're okay. Well, because you switched the order. Good luck with the cows. Tell the cows I said hi. My mom hates the cow bars. Yeah, she says that it's scary because the one. Yeah, they're kind of on like one little street, like convergence. They're like right there. Yeah. I want to feel my sister. you have 5 cents. Okay.
Oh.
And let it stay for a few minutes. Okay, so I want you to send it to me, and I'm going to give you the hit send.
No.
And then scroll down.
Okay.
Yep. And I have the links. And then down it out. And I'll pull it out so you can see it. That's actually very long. It's about